So now if we say bad food kills you, and we put it in
all the labels like in smoking.
Yeah, and you know, all the television sing this story. Yeah, then you're not gonna see.
I think you gotta have a dream.
The School of Greatness.
Really? Yeah.
Please welcome Lewis Howes.
I read a stat recently that between 150,000 and 180,000 people in the world die every day. I'm not sure how accurate that is, but that's the stat.
Sounds about right.
150 to 180,000 people a day die. What do you think is the main cause of people dying earlier than they should be dying?
Well, there are lots of causes, of course, you know, at different parts of the world, have very, very different. So lots of people die of malnourishment, you know, they don't have enough food, you know. And, but lots of people, maybe now more people, die of too much food and
obesity.
Too much food that is bad, right? And so, yeah, so I think that, you know, even China and the Middle East and regions that traditionally were doing very well, now you're starting to see obesity, overweight, diabetes, et cetera, and so that certainly is at the center of just too much food, and the wrong kind is at the center of almost every disease that you can think of.
Really? Are more people dying from too little food or too much food?
I don't know the stats on too little. I would say more or much more people are dying of too much food.
An abundance of the wrong foods as well.
Yeah. But the number of malnourished people is still high.
Yeah.
So I think that that both are a big problem. Yeah.
What's been one of the biggest? I mean, you've been studying this for 30 years, almost 30 years. You're, really obsessed with the data, the research, and doing a lot of these tests in labs. What has been the biggest finding that you've found on extending lifespan and longevity in the last 30 years? Well,
I think one of the biggest findings was the TOR pathway, right? So these genes that, because when I first started working with Roy Walford here at UCLA, very close by, it was 1982, right?
Wow.
And we were just doing comparative biology. You know, you take an old mouse, a young mouse, an old person, a young person, and you, at the end of it, you knew as much as before, right?
Okay.
I mean, you're just as confused as before. You knew there was difference, but you had no idea why. And so then I went back to the biochemistry department, and I went from humans and mice to microorganisms, you know, and that's where I think everything changed, because then we were able to identify the genes that control aging to the point where we took this microorganism and we can make them live 10 times longer. Really? Just by 2 mutation plus fasting, right? So we fasted them, and then we had 2 mutations, one in what's called what I call the sugar pathway, one is the protein pathway, plus the fasting, and we completely reprogrammed life, right? So yeah, so I think that was the initial central point, the discovery, the TOR kinase pathway in aging, and then we followed that up with nutrition and the finding that protein restriction, as long as you don't go too far, too low, that's also central for aging and diseases. And then after that, or at the same time, the fasting, the use of fasting-mimicking diets, and there was a sort of response to what Walford was doing. So Roy Walford, for those that don't know, was probably the most famous person in the world for nutrition and aging.
Okay.
Right? And he was a medical doctor at UCLA and a professor at UCLA, and he was working on something called calorie restriction. So, which it's a sort of simple idea. What happens if you take a normal diet and you reduce it by 25%?
Right.
Just eat less, a quarter less of the whatever diet.
Instead of 3,000 calories a day, it's 2,500 or 2,000 or whatever.
Yeah, so say 2,400 calories instead of, or 2,000 calories, 2,200 calories. So pretty restrictive. And actually, in most cases, it was more like 1,900 calories, right, for the people that were involved in the trials. And then one of his students, it was here at UCLA in Walford's lab right before me, Richard Weindruck, did a study in monkeys, right? So they took monkeys in Wisconsin, and they did a lifelong, let's see what happens if you calorie restrict them. If you just give them 25% less food, same identical food, but 25% less. If you look at that, it's remarkable because you would say, oh, just revolutionize medicine, right? They go from 60% diabetic or insulin resistant to 5%. Cancer is reduced by 50%. So cut in half. And cardiovascular disease is reduced by 20-30%. But then if you look at these monkeys, they don't live that much longer.
So restrict the monkeys 25% of the food. They had less disease or less cancer, but they didn't live longer. Is that what you said?
Yeah, they had less of all these diseases, all the major diseases.
But they didn't live longer than they.
But they lived a little bit longer,
Okay.
but not that much. You think, eliminate diabetes, less health of the cancers, and 30% less cardiovascular disease.
Should live 10 more years.
They're gonna live 20, 25 years longer. I mean, not the monkeys, but let's say, 20% longer, or something like that. And it didn't happen, right? So that tells you that that there were good and bad about this diet. And so then what I spent the next 30 years doing was, how can I eliminate the bad? Because obviously the good is unbelievable, right? I mean, more than anybody could dream, more than the NIH has been able to do, the National Institute of Health has been able to do in all these years, right? Yeah. I mean, almost eliminate diabetes and cut cancer and cardiovascular disease by 30 to 50%. So so then how do you do that? And I think that the periodic fasting mimicking diet certainly has that potential to allow people. And we'll see. I mean, of course, we got lots of clinical trials, so it's not just my opinion anymore. So lots of clinical trials, but the idea is, can you intervene for just 5 days, and instead of starving people, give them some food, not all the food they would like, but some food. And what if you do it only once every 4 months for 5 days? That's it, or maybe even once every 6 months. Could this change someone's health?
So 5 days, restricted diet, not restricted every day for the rest of your life, but for 5 days, a couple times a year.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So what if you do this vegan fasting mimicking diet with very specific content 2 or 3 times a year? Could that change things the same way the calorie restriction changed things? I mean, it's starting to look like yes. It's getting to that level, right? So we'll see. But is it getting to the abolishment of diabetes? I don't know. But certainly, we have a clinical trial now going, which finished now in Holland, looking at diabetes and 12. This is monthly cycles, right? So we'll see very soon the results of that. But I think there's going to be a trial coming out every couple months now.
Wow.
Using the FMD. So,
do you think it's possible to reverse diabetes or reverse cancer and disease from fasting and calorie restriction diets?
Yeah, not only is it possible, but we do it all the time, right?
Really?
So I just did a Facebook Live. Unfortunately, it's in Italian, but we took a doctor, a physician in Italy. And he had diabetes and hypertension.
This is a doctor?
A doctor, yeah. Diabetes and hypertension. We did that on purpose, right? I mean, we follow a lot of people. We have 2 clinics, foundation clinics, right? So we follow a lot of people, but we wanted to talk about this case, right? So is hypertension, diabetes, taking 4 drugs a day.
Wow.
So then we start with what I call the longevity diet. It's everyday longevity diet. It's pescatarian diet. And he's already improving with that. Then you look at the charts and you see, then we start with the fasting mimicking diet. And he was doing pretty well with the hypertension, he was doing pretty well with the weight, but he wasn't quite doing very well with the glycemia, so the diabetic component of it. And as soon as he starts a fasting mimicking diet, you see that the fasting glucose and the A1C dropping down. And 2 years later, perfect. No drugs, no disease. And I mean, I wouldn't talk like that if I didn't have clinical trials to back it up. Sure. Right? But I just thought that visualized so well. Wow. The what can be done
Did he? So what was his protocol for 2 years? Did he stay on the fasting mimicking every day? Or was this once every 6 months?
Twice a year.
Twice a year, and then he did the longevity diet.
Longevity diet, but is the idea at the clinics is work with the patient. Don't revolutionize somebody's diet. Try to start with what do you like, what do you think you can handle for the rest of your life, and then work with that. So it's a longevity diet that is really adapted to the need of, in this case, a doctor. So yeah, he did lots of the things we told him, and some of the others he didn't do. And
Like
so,
what? What other things?
Well, I think that, for example, we asked him to also exercise, and he didn't exercise, right? And we asked him to do 12 hours a day of time-restricted eating, so eat 8 a.m., 8 p.m. Most of the times he didn't do that. So yeah, so
and even without exercising, without doing the time-restricted eating, and just doing the longevity diet and the fasting mimicking process twice a year, he reversed his diabetes, got off medication.
Hypertension and diabetes.
What's hypertension? What is that?
High blood pressure.
High blood pressure. He reversed that, diabetes, and lost weight too, or
lost weight. Yeah, lost weight, is back to he's still a little bit overweight, but not that much, and he's perfect. Perfect blood markers and.
Now, what is in the longevity diet? What are the pillars of that?
Yeah, so the longevity diet is a pescatarian, so maybe fish 2 or 3 times a week, and then it's a vegan diet, so lots of legumes, lots of beans and chickpeas, etc. It's you eat a lot, right? So the idea is to eat a lot of food, more food than you would on a high calorie diet. Yeah, so big dishes, but big dishes. So for example, something that I eat 5 times a week is a little bit of pasta, maybe 70 grams, like 2 or 3 ounces, and then lots of vegetables and maybe lots of legumes, right? So lots of chickpeas or lots of black beans or green beans. Yeah. So
you're pretty skinny.
And I'm
a pretty skinny guy.
Yeah.
So you eat a lot. So you eat a lot of food. Is what you're saying.
Eat a lot of food. Yeah,
How do you stay skinny though? Is that a genetic thing or is that the process?
Well, it's a science, right? So the content of food will regulate the metabolism, right?
Really?
So, yeah.
So not the quantity, but the content.
Not the quantity. Well, first of all, you can eat a lot of food that is calorie low in calories, right?
Calories,
so
yeah.
it's not dense in calories.
A lot of
so
lettuce,
that's already one factor, that you have a mechanical. So your intestine is filled with food and with fibers, and so that already helps eating stuff, regulating the amount of food you eat. Then there is also a nutrient base, and the system detects how much of the nutrients you have and what's missing. And if nothing is missing, then that's also an order to, you don't need to eat anymore because you have everything you need. And then there is a further order within the food about metabolic regulation. And so that we haven't published about yet, but let's just say there are components of the food. So I cannot tell you what it is, but I can tell you the experiment. So you take mice, and then you give them 2 types of foods that have, in fact, you have more calories, or certainly a lot more food, but a little bit more calorie in diet A, right?
Okay.
And they overeat this diet, and they lose weight, versus diet B, they gain weight, right? So
wait, so there's more calories, more food in diet A, diet B, less calories, less food, and they lose weight in the first diet.
And they gain weight in the second diet.
Well, how's that possible?
Well, because the regulation of metabolic of fat breakdown, the regulation of metabolic rates, the regulation of heat production. So the system, everybody knows somebody that eats all the time,
and they're skinny and shredded, and they're fit,
and even in their 40s and 50s.
Yeah. You're like, how's this possible? Is this genetics, or is this the content and the context of the food they're eating?
Well, no. In their case, it's probably genetics.
Really?
Right. Yes. Yeah. Some people are just born with the right genes, and they can do that because most of the time you ask them what they eat, and they eat anything,
French fries
right?
and pizza, ice
So
cream.
but that very few people have that. Especially, I mean, everybody has that metabolism in their 20s, but as you get to 40s, and in the 40s and 50s, very few people have that. But when you find these people, it's really remarkable. You know, they eat twice as much as everybody else, and they stay skinny.
And they lose weight. Yeah.
Yeah. So then that can be controlled by genes, but it can also be controlled by what food you eat.
So let's say you don't have the shredded fat burning gene in your 60s, and you weren't born with that. What is the diet A that these mice had that helped them lose weight and eat more?
Yeah, that I cannot tell you, but I can tell you, you know, what I publish in my book. And by the way, all the profits go to, or my part go to charity, and which is, you know, the pescatarian diet, so the longevity diet. You know? So the longevity diet is certainly the one diet that is close enough to being able to cause these effects, right? So
really. The longevity diet.
Yeah, so lots of vegetables, lots of legumes, lots of nourishment, and
fish a few
couple times a week, 2 or 3 times a week, and always I think each person has to look at their own response, right? Like as we just say, some people can burn more, some people can burn less. So it's really a matter of watching your abdominal circumference, watching your weight. Watching your muscle mass, you know, so if you go too low, then maybe the proteins is not enough, maybe the protein quality is not sufficient, right? So these are all things that are personalized, and different people may have to adjust to make sure that, you know, in the end you're okay. Yeah.
Can you eat too much or too little protein? How much does protein really affect the body? Whether you're more of an athlete training hard every day, or just, you know, someone who's not working out as much, how does eating protein play into the body?
Yeah, protein is very, very important. So you can have too much. Most people have too much.
Really?
So we're about to publish a meta-analysis, and people having too high levels of IGF-1, and this IGF-1 is then associated with mortality, early mortality.
Really?
But then we see the opposite. We see the people that have too low IGF-1 doing even worse than the ones that have very high.
So it's better to have more protein than less.
Well, no, the best is to have that like low but sufficient level.
Okay.
Those are the people that live the longest, and those are the people that live the healthiest too. You know, apparently.
What's the amount you should be having on a daily basis, I guess?
Well, we calculated that around, I think it was around 60, 70 grams of protein per day seemed to be in that spot where it wasn't either too high or too low. It's an average of, this was based on the NHANES, on the CDC database in the United States.
And is this no matter how big or small you are, or is it kind of based on how, you know, if I'm 230 pounds, do I eat a little bit more? If I'm 130, do I eat a little less?
No, this is per kilogram, right?
Okay.
Yeah,
gotcha.
so there should be per, and it should be really per kilogram of mass, of lean body mass, bones and muscle, right? There shouldn't be, if somebody is 50% fat, that gets counted by maybe half, right? So yeah, there's some calculation to be done there, but yeah. So if somebody is 200 pounds and it's only like 15% fat, that person needs a lot more protein than somebody that is 120 pounds and 40% fat. You know.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah.
So 60 to 70 grams per day, based on your muscle.
Well, the number should be between 0.7 and 0.8 grams per kilogram. Okay. Which I think it turns out to be about 0.32 to 0.37 grams per pound. Per pound, yeah.
Okay, so how much protein you should have for yourself per day?
Yeah, that's how much protein. With then adjustment based on, this is not enough for me because I do too much training, too much exercise. So I'm just gonna increase it a little bit until I can. So for example, we just done a clinical trial with cancer patients, and we were trying to keep make the system very hostile to the cancer, right? And the physicians insisted that. So we gave a little training to the women that were with breast cancer, muscle training. So we wanted to make sure that they kept the muscle mass. And an interesting thing, they actually ended up gaining muscle mass, right? So we were just giving them too much proteins. And the mistake, I think, it was to give them 1.5 grams per kilogram instead of 0.8, so almost twice as much,
wow.
right? So anyways, yeah. So you can, but we measure their grip strength, and we measure their lean body mass, their muscle function, and you can see everything going up, right? Especially the muscle function and the muscle mass. So, and it doesn't take that much. So most people could, I think, come to the clinic here, the foundation clinic, Create Cures Foundation Clinic, and they can test you and just make sure that you have the right amount based on what you're trying to achieve.
Gotcha. So how much does gaining muscle mass and having strong muscles support in decreasing disease and also increasing longevity? Is it important to have more muscles or less?
Not really, no.
Really?
No.
Based on longevity and disease.
If you look at the people that are the longest, one of my passion is to go around the world and visit the oldest living people. So, for example, Emma Morano, I followed for the last 5 years of her life. She got to 117, right? So
117.
Yeah, the third oldest person who ever lived in this planet.
Wow.
And most of them are really thin, and really frail.
Well, I guess
thin.
at that age, though, you're going to be a lot thinner.
Yeah, but I think if you look at their at the way they wear, if you look at the pictures, and if you look at their sons and daughters,
they were skinny.
In most cases, they're very skinny. The Okinawans, for example, it's another place in Japan where they have record longevity, and they're very, very thin. Now, that doesn't mean it's necessarily good to be old and thin. Right. It's probably not good.
You break your bones if you fall.
Yeah, you're frail. But and that's what we're trying to bring into this, right? This age-specific nutrition. We're saying, for example, we published some years ago that those that were 70, 80 years old, whereas the people that had a low-protein diet were doing much better up to age 65 for cancer and overall mortality after age 65. So when we asked the 70, 80, 90-year-olds, how much proteins you eat per day? And they answered very little. They were not doing well at all. Right?
They weren't doing well.
They were not
with
doing
low
well.
protein.
If we asked the 60-year-old, the 50-year-old, and they said, I have a very low protein diet, they were doing very well. Right? So this is suggesting that eventually that muscle, that strength is going to help you in your older years, but it doesn't really help you that much because it's probably that those growth factors in the food you eat that helps you keep the muscle is also working against you when we're talking about diabetes, cancer, cardiovascular disease, etc.
If you had a magic wand and you could eliminate 3 foods or 3 types of foods in the world that we would never be able to eat, what would those 3 foods be that would support you in longevity, healthier body, less disease? What would you say are those?
I don't like to say that because people then think, I'm gonna remove red meat from the.
Well, if you could minimize it, where you could only do it every once in a while.
Yeah, I would say certainly processed meats. So those are clearly in the bad category for cancer, cardiovascular disease, etc. Then I would say probably fried animal fats. Oils, etc. When they're fried, they're not good at all.
What happens to the body when they're fried?
Well, the fats change, and when they change, they can cause inflammation. They can contribute to. The number one cause of that in the United States is still cardiovascular disease.
Right.
And
that's inflammation is causing
inflammation and the fats, right? So the fats then are gonna help deposit in the inside walls of the arteries. And then when you have inflammation plus the fats and these saturated fats particularly, now you have a recipe for a heart attack, for stroke, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, so those are...
processed meats, fried animal fats, and what would you say would be the third one?
The third one may be like processed sweets, right? So the type of stuff that you see
Like
in a
what?
package with lots of sugar in it.
Oh man, the good stuff. The
Yeah,
sweet.
well, I mean, yes and no. For example, every day I eat dark chocolate, 85% dark chocolate. I think if you ask me, when I used to have candy,
It doesn't taste as good for
well, I would have said, no, I'd rather have the candy. If you ask me now, I would say there is no way. I'm so much happier with the dark chocolate.
Why is that?
Well, because I think there is a more richness in the flavor, and it's kind of like, when we're 16, we drink beer, right, and Coke. And then eventually wine comes in, and it takes a while, right? It takes a
Yes.
while to
Acquire the taste.
yeah. But then for most people, if you say the people that are drinking wine, or let's say high quality beer, if you say you want to go back and have the sugary stuff, I mean, yeah, some people say yes, but lots of people say no. I mean, I'd rather have this. I'd rather have high quality,
Right.
beer or wine rather than cheap stuff or sugary drinks, right? So, I think it's the same way with the sweets. Eventually, you appreciate the just incredible taste of some of the very healthy sweets that are not necessarily, viewed as very tasty.
Yeah, right. But they're more acquired over time, and they become very tasty to you over time.
Yeah.
What? So that fasting has become this massive, more mainstream, talked about thing. We were talking about this before. There's all these big fasting apps with millions of users. There's tons of fasting books. There's different types of fasting. There's water-only fasting that you do for a few days. There's, just very calorie-restricted fasting. There's the time-restricted fasting. There's the fasting-mimicking diet. There are all these different types of fasting. Can you break down maybe the pros and cons of some of these that you've seen?
Yeah.
And which one is most effective for us? Or is it something we just need to try and see what works for us?
I would definitely say no to your last question, right?
Okay.
So yeah, it's not about trying, because it can do. Fasting is like eating, right?
Okay.
It can do a lot of good for you or a lot of damage, right? And so I would say that you're starting to see lots of clinical studies and preclinical, so animal studies, clinical, and at a certain point you put it together and you get a good sense for what works and what doesn't work. It doesn't mean it's not by no means final, but you get a good sense. So I would say if you look at the daily type of fast, what clearly works and is not associated with any negative effects is 12 hours, right?
12 hours
12
fasting
hours of time restricted eating,
a day.
right?
Oh,
Yeah.
Don't eat for 12 hours.
Yeah, say 8 a.m., 8 p.m., stop eating at 8 p.m., and no more food until next day, 8 a.m., okay?
Okay.
So that, I would say, I've never seen a negative study about this.
So if you wake up, you eat between 8 and 8, you're good.
Yeah.
Don't eat before 8 a.m., don't eat after 8 p.m.
Yeah, so that's already a very good one. Another one, now, if you go to 16 hours, right, say 16-8, you're starting to see lots of benefit, but you start seeing lots of problems, right?
What type of problems?
Well, first of all, gallstone formation, right? Gallbladder operation, gallstone formation, they double between the people that fast for 10 hours and people that fast for 18 hours, right?
Really?
Yeah. So just to give you one. Another one, study after study after study, and we've done the same study, but somebody else published it before we got a chance to, people that skip breakfast. Most people that go 16 hours will skip breakfast. And the breakfast skippers tend to live less, have more cardiovascular disease, have more disease in general, right?
Okay, wait. Let me break this down. So for years, I was always eating breakfast because I love breakfast. Then I heard about intermittent fasting, where it's like skip the breakfast and eat at lunch and do the 8-hour window, right? But you're telling me now that the studies are showing that those that skip breakfast are living less and having more problems than if you eat breakfast and eat within the 12-hour window.
No, if you just eat breakfast.
Just
right?
eat breakfast.
So eat breakfast against not eating breakfast, right?
Gotcha. So just eating breakfast. What are the studies showing now between not eating breakfast and eating breakfast.
Yeah, so the people that skip breakfast, they're living shorter with more diseases.
Really?
And there's study after study after study. It's
Come
not
on.
one,
Really?
It's very consistent.
Is this for people, over 60 years old or
No,
20?
no. Yeah, this is just looking at people, did they have breakfast or not? And then follow, let's say for 20 years, the mortality of those that historically never eat breakfast.
Are there other conditions around that where they were overstressed or they were, didn't have good relationships or?
They adjust for most of it, but it's possible. But my point to those that say, well, maybe it's something else, it's not the breakfast skipping. Yeah, I say, but if it's so beneficial to go 16 hours a day of fasting, why doesn't it at least bring you back to normal life, right?
Interesting.
So
why is breakfast so important?
Well, nobody knows, but it could be that it's setting up the metabolism, right? It's setting up the metabolism to be like we were discussing earlier, right? So if it's affecting the way you burn fat, if it's affecting the way your insulin functions, et cetera, eventually you could be more prone to, insulin resistance, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, et cetera. You don't need very much. And also the heart, right? So it could be the ketone bodies, this continuous high level. So when you fast, these ketone bodies, this is what the word ketogenesis comes from. These byproducts of fat are going up in the bloodstream, right? And also fatty acids, right? The fat themselves. And these can alter the way your heart works and the way your brain works. So we don't know, but it is possible that by having lots of that all the time, now some of the systems now develop problems and not improve.
So it's okay if you're doing like a week-long fast or a 3-day fast to obviously skip the food or have less food during breakfast, but you're saying skipping breakfast on a consistent basis has proven that it's not a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, obviously nobody did an experiment where they say, well, let's randomize that 10,000 people and you skip breakfast and you don't, and let's wait 30 years, right? They cannot be done. But it's epidemiological study. So, you look at the databases and you say the breakfast skippers, are they doing better or worse than the non-breakfast skippers? And they're doing consistently worse.
Wow.
Right? And this is why you want to say, okay, if you want to do 16 hours, talk to a doctor, fine. It could help you, do it for a month or two, but then find something else. Yeah, find something else because it does have a beneficial effect. It can have could do lots of good things, but then eventually you don't want to keep it for 20 years. Yeah. So that's the sort of daily stuff. Once you get to alternate day fasting and all that, I think it's just crazy stuff. It's just, I always say I have a difficult time at asking people to go from 4 coffees to 3 coffees a day, right? So if you go to someone and say, oh no, from now on, beside the potential, long-term problems that we just discussed, right? So if 16 hours does that, what could happen if you don't eat every other day, right? But beside that, just the feasibility, the fact that people are actually going to do this, it's just extremely unlikely. I mean, you're looking at one person out of 100, maybe they can not eat every other day.
Right. What about one day a month? If you're like, I'm going to do a 24-hour fast, one day a month. Is that
Yeah, and nobody knows, right? Nobody knows. The problem with that, and this is why my lab and my group is always focused on this, developing this fasting-mimicking diet, is that in the one day you don't quite get into the ketogenic mode, right?
In one day of fasting.
Yeah, in one day of fasting. So you struggle because most people would not view that positively. I mean, tomorrow or next week, I'm not going to have a day where I don't eat, right? So it's a struggle. And also, you don't quite get, so you're hungry for that 24 hours, and you don't quite get into a starvation response mode, right? Yeah, that's why we're saying probably the system, if you look at our history, right? Most likely we can't go back in time, but so most likely in the summers we had the job to get fat, right?
Fill up for winter.
Lots of fruit, honey, whatever you can get your hands on, eat as much as possible. And then the diabetes and pre-diabetes, the insulin resistance that then leads to diabetes, so insulin doesn't work as well, it was probably part of that process of making you store fat. Put away as much fat as possible. So now, this can be activated any time of the year, right? Because people overeat all year long. And so what we see now clinically is that when you do, let's say, 5 days of a fasting-mimicking diet, or it could even be water-only fasting, you unlock that. You seem to unlock that mode where, and this is why the doctor that I was telling you about, you see him even using the longevity diet, but he's still not quite losing that insulin resistance until he does the fasting-mimicking diet.
Really?
That changes, and you clearly see the slope of the glucose levels curve, and so probably.
And the fasting mimicking diet is around like 300 to 500 calories a day type of thing. Is that right? Or
no, the fasting mimicking diet is the one for regular people is 1,100 calories on day 1, and then it goes to 800 calories on day 2, 3, 4, 5. Right.
Okay,
so
gotcha. So it's 800 calories for the last 4 days. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so then the possibility is, considering that over 70% of Americans are either overweight or obese. Now we're saying if you intervened a couple of times a year at least, and you remind the system we are not in summer mode. Okay, let's go into winter mode. Let's burn these fats because we're no longer having to store them. So that could be the trick of the 5 days versus, let's say, 1 day a month.
Interesting.
Which may keep the system confused and not sure. Did we reach another phase here? Do we need to go now into a fat burning mode, or can we stay in the fat accumulating mode?
So what's the difference between having the fasting mimicking process of 5 days, 800 to 1,000 calories, versus water only for 5 days?
If I've done it, I can tell you the difference. I've done it one time.
With water only for 5 days?
And I remember every day of it. Right?
The pain of it, you mean, or what?
Yeah. To me, it was near torture.
Really?
And we knew that was true when we did that I was telling you about the clinical trial, the first clinical trial in 2009, I think it was here at USC, on cancer patients. And we thought, somebody has cancer, they're not going to argue with water-only fasting. They're going to do it, right?
Right, yeah.
We were sure, the oncologists were sure, let's go, let's do it. Nobody wanted to do it, right?
Wow.
So this is why we went to the government and said, we would like to develop a fasting mimicking diet, for cancer patients. That's where it comes from, right? So it comes from the refusal of cancer patients to.
We're like, I'm going to eat no matter what. Well, then.
To do, yeah. It's a safety issue. There's lots of things in food that are important to maintain high enough glucose level, high enough blood pressure, et cetera, et cetera. So once you remove it, I think people can do water-only fasting, but probably in a specialized clinic.
Right.
Yeah. So if you go to a place,
it is effective.
It is effective.
If you're in a specialized clinic and you have.
Yeah. But watch out, though, right? Because, again, as we were saying earlier, the devil is in detail. And if you go long enough, right, especially if you're extreme and long, then the body goes into another response, which is thrifty mode. So the body
Thrifty mode, so it stops burning.
Yeah. Then the body
it keeps the fat.
Let's say you go a couple of weeks without food at all. The body now has to intervene and say, we're going to be in trouble soon enough, right?
So we're going to keep that. We're not going to burn this.
We're not going to burn.
Wow.
And so now you could have, and we know this from long-term calorie restriction studies, you could have probably, nobody's ever figured out what it is, but it's called epigenetic change. Mm-hmm. So there's a switch that turns on and say, okay, from now on, and maybe for years, I'm now in a saving mode. I'm going to save energy. So now if you, and this is why the technology is so important, right? So you want to do all the things that we just talked about, and you want to avoid all the bad things, right? Mm-hmm. You don't want to get into thrifty mode. You want to get into the ketogenic mode. You want to burn start burning the fat, keep that long term, and avoid the side effects So all of this, even though people think it's an old thing, people used to do it, you see how the purpose, it was not to get to 110 years of age healthy back 2,000 years ago. The purpose, if you were lucky, is make it to 50 years of age and have children. So now everything changed, right? So now we can't just fast the old ways.
Right.
We have to know, we have to be respectful of the tradition and what we learn from all these old practices, but at the same time, we have to bring in the science, the clinical trials, and say, okay, how do we, where do they match? What's the common denominator between all these things?
So who was the woman you said is 117 years old?
Emma Morano is her name. Yeah.
Emma Morano. She's Italian?
Italian, yeah, from Verbania, Italy. Yeah.
Wow. What are the main causes beyond diet of her living a long, healthy life?
In her case, it was genetics, right? So, and we knew, you're never 100% sure, but you're pretty sure because when I asked her, tell me about all your brothers and sisters and your mom and father.
They all lived old.
All of them but one over the age of 90.
Oh my gosh.
And the chance of that is 1 in a billion probably, right? So extremely unlikely that by chance a bunch of people in the same family, virtually everyone out of 10 people will make it to 90. Yeah.
So that's a genetic, that's a gene type of thing. What is the gene that she has or her family has, and is there a way that we can trigger those genes in ourselves?
Yes, with nutrition, with the longevity diet and the fasting-mimicking diet and a few other things. Yeah, so we've been following now for 15 years this population in Ecuador, and they're little people, right? So they're about 3 feet tall.
No way. 3 feet?
3 feet tall, yes. And they're lacking what's called growth hormone receptor. But why are we studying these people? Because if you remember our first discovery of the genes that control aging in microorganisms, it was in the same what's called pathway. So these microorganisms that live 10 times longer, they are little, right? Yeah. So and then the work by John Kapczyk and Andrei Barkey here in the U.S. showing that the mice that have record longevity extension, they're little mice, right? With the same mutation in the same gene, the growth hormone receptor.
Both you and I are kind of tall though. Are we screwed?
No, not necessarily, because we know that we can intervene, at different stages of life, right? So you can intervene. You can start a nutritional intervention or a pharmacological intervention on a mouse at different stages. Of course, the earlier you start, the bigger the effect you see. But you can still get a lot of the effects later in life, especially if you consider the deaths from diseases, right? If you switch your nutrition, even if somebody was 60 years old, they could still make a big difference.
You could still extend your lifespan and reverse diseases at 60 potentially.
Yeah, almost for sure. If you consider that. Yeah, if you consider cardiovascular disease and diabetes alone, those you can truly revolutionize, let's say, the chance of developing them or having them progress based on a clear and strong change in your diet.
Wow. What were the other factors beyond nutrition that you think are allowing her to live a longer life?
Well, the big factor was Carlo Bava, her doctor, right? Big factor. Why? Because Carlo, the attention, and we saw that when I visited Monte Carlo and San Marino, some of the places that have the highest longevity in the world, I realized that one of the major reasons is that they have such a close attention to the old person, right?
The doctors do?
The medical system, right? So they for example, in Monte Carlo, if you're older, they can bring you the food at home. They have ambulances very close by. They have a safety system
for older people.
For everybody, but for older people, that make sure that if you get a heart attack, they're going to be there very quickly, or they're going to catch it early, or they're gonna give you the test, right? So
So
yes, that's how Carlo Bava was with Emma Morano. He made sure that she got checked, she got treated. He had to do some blood transfusion. I think he did them at her home because she didn't want to go to the hospital. So she would have probably made it to 100 on her own, but to make it to 117, I think it took a very inspired physician.
So it's, regular checkups, it's prevention of things. It's not just going through life saying I'm fine. It's, going to do a checkup once or twice a year and making sure blood levels are good and everything's good. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that having somebody follow your nutrition and have the right people follow your nutrition is key.
Interesting.
But at the same time, are you gonna get a colonoscopy or not? Are you gonna check your fasting glucose level, the HbA1c? Are you gonna if you have high blood pressure? Are you going to intervene strongly enough against it without resorting to drugs, right? So the idea is, as you introduce drugs, and the more drugs are in the system, the more the system now is going to adapt, change, and now each drug can cause another problem, right? So then ideally, you want to try to keep everything working without drugs, which is very difficult to do, and that's why you need probably a team that helps you get there.
Let's say you have unlimited resources. Let's just hypothetical situation. You've got unlimited resources, or you've got a certain amount of money to dedicate towards a nutritional health doctoral team a year. Who would you want to have on your team, or what types of people should people be looking for on their team? Is it a nutritionist? Is it a specific type of doctor? Is it a trainer? What are those people that we should be looking for?
So we're trying to do that both in Italy and here in Los Angeles. And so we have physicians that are in internal medicine doctors, and they are integrative type of doctors. So they understand, they appreciate the integration with other interventions that could be nutrition, exercise, etc., etc. Then we like to have at the clinic dietitians that have higher degrees, right? The type of person that might have focused on nutrition might get a Ph.D., right? And then ideally a psychologist. We don't have that yet because we're still small, but I think that would be very helpful. And then the collaboration, which we have, luckily, with lots of hospitals all over the world, right? So in each case, we look for partners usually we do clinical trials. But our partners include MD Anderson, Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, and so as we develop clinical protocols, then we go to some of the leading hospitals, and usually the leading hospitals are very open. They like things that are different, and they're looking forward or forward-looking, and so I think that eventually it'd be nice that everybody had that, right? Everybody had so let's say you come to our clinic, and then based on the problem, the clinic says, I think you should be treated by this oncologist or this cardiologist or this immunologist, because they're probably the ones that are gonna work with the team in a way that minimizes maybe the drug interventions until you do need the drug intervention. For example, in cancer trials, it's all drugs, right?
Yes.
So it's fasting-mimicking diet plus the drugs. We've never seen any evidence that doing it without the drugs is going to be helpful.
How much of a negative effect does taking drugs consistently in your life affect the longevity of your life? Either a little bit of drugs or medication or a lot of drugs?
Yeah, nobody knows, right? Because I don't know that there is any formal studies on this. But I think that the body is in a perfect equilibrium.
Yes,
right? So
harmony.
Everything is perfect. It was nearly perfect, let's say. And so, for example, if you think about cholesterol, right? So now you have a statin. So this drug is now going to block cholesterol synthesis. Well,
it's going to cause a different problem, right?
Yeah. Is that good? Well, yeah, it's good because it's lowering your blood cholesterol. But at the same time, you have to ask the question, why were you making all that cholesterol? What are you trying to do with that, right? So the cholesterol is involved in making hormones, in building cells. So what happens when you block that, right? So then you have to consider that lots of drugs are blocking things. And they're not necessarily blocking things in a sophisticated way, right? So they're not, let's say, go after the cholesterol synthesis and say, I'm going to allow this type of cholesterol to be made, but I'm going to, affect some other subtype. Usually they're pretty rough, right? So of course, things are getting better. In some cases, there are more sophisticated drugs. For example, those that are targeting the immune system, they try to, let's say somebody has an autoimmunity, the drugs are trying to go after only a subset of immune function, so they don't take away your normal immune function. But most of the immune drugs will say the chance of infections is going to go up, and the risk of death from this and that. Yeah, so that means that when they ran the trial, they observed that the risk of certain diseases or infections went up, and it's not surprising. Now you're blocking something else that is trying to help you, right? But that is also hurting you by, let's say, attacking your own cells. So yeah, no matter what system you look at, what type of drug, cancer drugs, right? Let's say immunotherapy. Well, lots of good, right? Because it changed the survival in several types of cancers. But then again, now some people are going to have the immune system attacking the normal cells, and so there's lots of side effects caused by immunotherapy, right? So yeah, so I think that
so it's best to figure out what's the root cause of it. Try to get to the root first before using the drug, is what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, let's take diabetes. Let's take the doctor that we were talking about earlier, right? So he's got diabetes, he's got hypertension.
He had 4 medications he was on.
4 medications, right? So, and he was going to be on his way within, I would say, 2 or 3 years of having to inject insulin, with the pancreas being, irreversibly damaged, right?
Wow.
So right there you see that what should have been done. He knew how to do it. Now you could say, lots of people are not going to be able to do it. Well, of course they're not if they don't have the team, right?
Yeah.
If they don't have the team, and we already see, for example, in Holland, we did a clinical trial, a multi-center clinical trial, where we did not have a centralized registered dietitian calling people up and knowing the system and the compliance. So the percentage of patients that did more than 3 or 4 cycles of the fasting-mimicking diet together with chemo went down to like 35% or something like that. When we do it with the dietitian calling you, then we're up 70, 80, 90%, right?
So you mean just the dietitian calling you for accountability, to check in once a week or once a month and saying, are you doing what you're supposed to do? And
how are you feeling? Here's what you can expect from this, right? How are you feeling? Did you eat anything else? Can I help you? Yeah, so that completely changes the ability and the willingness of a patient to do it. So yeah, so I think one thing is to say to a patient, change your diet, and one thing is to say, don't worry about it. We got the team, we're gonna help you, and at the beginning you're gonna have lots of questions, lots of calls, and then after a couple months you're gonna say, I don't want to talk to you anymore. I know.
Yeah, I got this. I'm doing it. I'll check in less. Yeah.
I'm doing it, and now you have continuous glucose monitors. We use that on this doctor, for example, right? Really? So yeah, we were able to without him even seeing it, we were following his fasting glucose, adjusting to it. So we will call him and say, okay, what did you do? Did you eat something last night? And last night I had a big dinner, and so I think that. The technology is a big help, so that just in also making it easier for the clinic to do the job.
Did this doctor, was he obese as well, and did he lose a lot of weight in this process?
He was overweight. He lost weight. He didn't lose it wasn't somebody that lost 40 pounds,
Right.
He must have lost, I don't know, maybe around 10 pounds or something like that.
But he reversed a lot of the challenges internally in his body.
Well, that's a trick, right? It was losing weight, but that wasn't so. So there seems to be two factors, right? One is going after, let's say, blood pressure and other issues that he had, but that wasn't really changing his insulin resistance, right? So that was solved by the fasting mimicking diet. And so there's probably that switch that keeps the body in let's store fat to let's use fat, and that's what needs to be unlocked. So that the combination of the correct everyday diet and that a diet that forces that unlocking process seems to be key.
If someone's just like, they don't need any medication for anything, they're pretty fine except for they're overweight or they've got 40 pounds to lose, and they just care about fat loss and losing the weight, what would be the process you would suggest to them? Is it the fasting mimicking diet once every 4 to 6 months and the longevity diet? Is it something else included in that? What would you recommend there?
Yeah, no, I mean, in the book, The Longevity Diet, I describe all of it. But I would say the longevity diet, pescatarian, up to age 65, 70, let's say. The one we described earlier, the 12 hours.
12 hours, yeah.
The 150 minutes a week of exercise. And I think, for anybody that can do it, 1 hour a day of walking, So find a restaurant that is 15 minutes away or a coffee shop and go there twice, That's 1 hour of walking.
What was the exercise amount? How much a week?
150 minutes a week. Right. So this is based on
2.5 hours, just 2.5 hours
a week. Yeah,
that's it, of working out, of some strenuous exercise.
Yeah, running, biking, swimming. That doesn't have to be strenuous. I think only about 10% of that. So about 15 minutes has to be strenuous.
Okay.
So out of the 150, push yourself for 15. So try to push the limits, where your heartbeat goes high.
So 2.5 hours a week of that type of workout, and on top of that, an hour of walking every day.
Yeah. Then on top of that, every day, stairs. Don't use elevators. Just your body is not made for all this
sitting around, standing around. Yeah. So how important is the hour a day of walking?
I think it's very important.
Really?
Yeah, I think it's very important. And I think when I go around the world and talk to centenarians, you always get the ones that were shepherds, that were working in the field. The majority of them had sort of some type of manual labor, And so I think it's very important, also psychologically, to just, be out there and, just walk and get used to that and get used to the stairs, And I always show my students this escalator in the metro of Genova. And so you have the stairs and you have the escalator and you have like 200 people on the escalator, not a single person on the stairs, And so we turn into, systems that are continuously dependent on cars and machines that do the job for us,
Right.
So the elevator and so there is really even if you think about gardening and there's some of the things that you see maybe in Japan, in Okinawa, eventually even something like gardening can mean a lot of physical exercise.
Yeah, you're on your knees, you're squatting, you're using your body in different ways to get in there and stuff like that. You're not just sitting around the whole day.
Yeah, I think that's very important. And then I would say I do it myself, and for all the people that tend to gain weight, and I'm one of them. I usually do breakfast and I do dinner and either no lunch Like, when I go to Italy, I have lunch also because it's hard for me not to have lunch there. But when I come back to the States, like Monday through Friday, I don't have lunch. I just have coffee for lunch, like a tall coffee, and that's it. And that's helped me for the past 20 years.
Really?
And helped me and helped a lot of people that we follow in the clinics. So that's for not for everybody, but I would say for most people, that's a great way to control weight. Without adding any problems, because again, you don't want to skip breakfast. Dinner, most people don't want to skip because of dinner is just friends and family and just So and Monday to Friday. So even the lunch on a Sunday weekend is probably not a good idea, right?
Wow.
But Monday to Friday, I find it extremely easy. And usually, I still remember when I first did it 20 years ago, very difficult, right?
To skip lunch.
Yeah, the first month and a half of skipping lunch was extremely difficult for me. And then now, having lunch or not having lunch makes no difference.
Wow.
No difference. I would say that it's almost neutral effect, If you take away my breakfast or my dinner, and now I'm back to that behavior or when I first started.
It might take a few months, but it's not going to have the benefits in your body and longevity.
Well, I mean, no, dinner could, right? If you skip dinner, it could. Lots of centenarians eat no dinner or very little dinner.
They have breakfast, lunch, and then they stop at 3 o'clock.
Yeah, that's very common. Nobody studied that, right? So I think it's a little bit less risky right now, knowing all we know, that you keep, you have a snack a little bit. You have breakfast and dinner and a little snack in between. That's a good way to control weight and not introduce any potential problems. If you skip dinner, it could turn out that 10 years down the road we find out the same that was true for breakfast. Skipping is true for now. You're gonna have too many hours of fasting, and now you're back to the good and the bad, right?
So you think no more than 12 hours of fasting is key, right? 12 hours only.
Well,
on average,
we know that 16 hours got problems associated with it. And so 16 hours can be good for short periods,
for a week or something, but
even for a couple of months. If somebody had diabetes and the physician said, we're going to put you on this 16-hour for 2 months. Let's get you down, and then we put you on the longevity diet or whatever other diet. Yeah, I think that's reasonable. That just to unlock a little bit the person to get him lower. To get them to lose some weight and lose some of the abdominal fat that may be helping them also maybe psychologically get into a modality where they're going to change their diet.
Yeah. So no lunch. So a lunch fast is what we're looking to do. Wow, that's interesting. So you've been doing that for 20 years.
I've been doing that for 20 years.
No, most of the time, no lunch.
Yeah, and I mean, I think
you have a big breakfast then, or is it like, what do you usually eat for breakfast?
No, I have an apple and some, almond spread, and
butter
almond chocolate spread, and then some, it's called friselle. It's like dry bread from Italy, from the south of Italy.
That sounds good.
Very good.
So you have an apple with some spread, some bread.
And tea, yeah.
And tea. That's your breakfast.
That's my breakfast.
No lunch. What time do you usually eat breakfast?
Let's say 9 o'clock,
8:30,
9 o'clock, yeah.
And then no lunch. And then do you have an earlier dinner, later dinner? How's that?
No, then I have a dinner about 8.
8 o'clock.
Yeah.
Is there a time we should stop eating dinner to help us with fat loss or with longevity?
I would say 3 hours from bedtime. So
okay.
So yeah, and this is what I do. But people can be shifted to 7 a.m. Say 7 a.m., 7 p.m.
Right.
And then they go to bed. Let's say at 10. I go to bed at maybe midnight, and I stop eating at 9. So yeah. So I pretty much follow all the things that I preach.
That's good. So the longevity diet, 12-hour fasting daily in that window, 1 hour daily of walking, 2.5 hours a week of working out. Eat breakfast and dinner, skip lunch Monday through Friday if you can do the weekend.
If you're weight gainer or you're overweight or you're obese. If you have normal weight, then you can eat 5 times a day.
Right, okay.
Yeah,
So
for normal weight and normal abdominal circumference. So you're not accumulating fat. Let's say somebody's got 12%, 13% fat.
They don't need to skip lunch.
they don't need to skip anything. They might need to eat more, Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. And you mentioned in this team, if we could have this, if everyone could have a team around them, you mentioned a psychologist. Why is a psychologist important for, healthy weight control and longevity?
I think that, this everything is about the mind and your ability to follow certain things and to do them, and that gets even worse for somebody that's got cancer or has got a disease. But even somebody that has nothing, just let's say the 7 out of 10 Americans that are overweight, the psychologist can make a tremendous difference in allowing you to see the maybe the problems that are behind the overeating, or not being able to be disciplined, right? Because in the end, you have to have this discipline, some type of discipline, right? So you have to have it for the exercise, you have to have it for the hour walk, you have to have it for the 12 hours. All of this takes some form of discipline.
Structure, order, scheduling, discipline, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that a psychologist can probably help you get there. It might not get everybody there, but I would say there's probably a large percentage of people that would benefit from having a professional understand why you're not able to make those changes, and then allow you to get there in a way that is easy enough and also permanent, right? So the worst thing you could do is do a diet, so change nutrition and then go lose a lot of weight and then go back, right? It's much better to never change, right? And I'm talking about it's much better for longevity. So this is being studied. You do this yo-yo more than a couple times in your life, you're gonna live shorter, right?
Really? Why is that?
Well, nobody knows, right? But this is being shown by epidemiological studies. So people that have lost, I think it was more than 10% of their weight, at least twice in their life. So they've done some type of
extreme,
heavy nutritional change, and they live shorter than those that just kept the same weight but never bothered to lose it.
Interesting. And what do you think is the main cause for 7 out of 10 Americans being overweight and obese? Is it lack of discipline, lack of knowledge, just abundance of food available that they're just eating? Is it they don't care, they're not educated? What's the...
No, I think it's the system.
System.
The whole system is structured. The food companies.
The food marketing.
The food companies make a lot of money selling everything. And the food company, each individual can say, look, don't blame me. I'm just selling French fries. Am I a bad person because I sell French fries? No, it's okay to allow people to eat some French fries. But then you have the medical system that basically says, we're not that interested in nutrition. We're interested in treating people. And then you have the hospital making a lot of money,
because people are sick,
and the insurance company pay for it. So the entire system loves it like this, right? The funny thing is, of course, all the people that are working for these companies that sell food and hospitals are the patients themselves,
Oh, right.
And that's the ironic part, right? So I think that you have to change all the way from the journalist to the TV commercials to the entire system has to change. And so we kind of like it happened for smoke, right? You have to sort of say, yeah, this is not good for you. And so at some point, then the system said, smoking kills you. And then that did not change everything, but certainly it cut the smokers in health, and maybe a little bit over health right now.
Right.
So that's
good.
That's a big victory, right? That's a big victory. So now if we say bad food kills you, and we put it in
all the labels, like in smoking.
Yeah, and all the television sing this story, and the universities and the hospitals, and then you're not gonna see everybody. But out of the 72% or so, I think we go down to 35.
Wow.
Or so.
What's the obesity? And you grew up in Italy, right? What's the obesity level there?
Is getting very close to the children. I wrote a book last year in Italian, and which I'll publish here soon, and it's called "Longevity Starts in Childhood," and the overweight percentage in Italy surpassed the United States in the children. Yeah.
Really? How is that possible?
Obesity was higher for the US and overweight percentage was higher for Italy. And if you look at southern Italy, it's much higher.
Why? How's that possible?
Same problem. Same system.
Really?
The system, lots of confusion, create lots of confusion. And so nobody knows what you're supposed to do anymore. Create lots of drugs, lots of commercials, and all the magazines are just packed with commercial.
Really? Drugs and food, huh?
Food and drugs. We're just surrounded by by advertisement of food and drugs. So get sick,
eat this food, and then have the drug.
Have the drug and the hospital that
to make you feel
that
good
takes
again.
care of this,
Wow.
And then, of course, in the process, we go bankrupt because 17% of GDP, right? So it's a lot. That's a very expensive process, right? So,
what's the healthiest country in the world? And what are they doing differently?
That's a good question. I would say that Japan is certainly still among those that don't have a big obesity and overweight problem.
I'm sure there is a percentage, but it's not.
Yeah, no, obviously there's a percentage, but I think it's very far from the 70% of the US and I think 50% or so of Italy. And most Europe, by the way, right? It's not Italy especially. It's like
most of
just
Europe
all
is 50% now.
Yeah, most Europe is around 50%, and overweight and obesity. So I think that Japan is probably one of the examples of doing a better job for sure than most of other countries, and so it can be done. I mean, it's just pretty straightforward if you think about it, but it just involves everybody, right? You cannot have people like me going around and saying, eat like this, eat like that. If the doctors, the dietitians, the CNN and everybody else, if they don't get on board,
it's hard. It's too much confusion.
It's not going to happen.
And then people are just exhausted or tired, and then just eat whatever they want.
Yeah, then of course, low fat, right? For 20 years, low fat, and people are gaining weight, right? And then it's like, oh no, it's not fat. It's got to be carbs. Low carb, and people are gaining weight, right? So in both the low fat era and in the low carb era, Americans and Europeans have gained weight, right? So why? Because we're eating too many calories, and from both fat and sugars and carbohydrates, right? And proteins, right? So we have more of everything, right? And that's a problem. So and it's just easier for the media to demonize. It used to be fat, and now it's carbs, and at some point maybe we'll contribute to demonizing proteins, which we're not trying to do because we're saying, hey, a healthy level of protein is essential for making it to 110 healthy. But it just I remember when we published in 2014 a paper on proteins, and we showed that it was two phases of life, right? As I mentioned earlier. Up to 65, low protein, then after 65, go to a moderate protein intake, and maybe you can have a more of a variety of food, right? So a little bit more meats and yogurts and et cetera. And I remember one of the big national shows, the physician went on TV and looked at our paper, it's like, low protein, and then it changes, too confusing. It was two things, right? It was very simple, right? But even just the fact that we had described two phases of life to the physician on television was too confusing. And so that's a message that we give people. It just gotta be one word, high this, low that. Then people can understand it. If it's more than that, it's too confusing. And so then of course people are going to suffer the consequences of this.
How much does your environment play into longevity? Like the space you live in, the city, the weather, how much does that play into your beyond nutrition, your longevity?
Probably a little bit, but not a big effect, Okay. So I think, New York, I think it's got a lot of people that live long lives. New York City, and so
New York City does.
New York City does, yeah.
Really?
So,
why is that?
Probably because they're pretty wealthy, and they have good doctors, and they have good food, and yeah, so
community, and they got people around.
yeah, I mean, you get the checkups, you're eating healthy, and even though you're in a very stressful city full of people and probably polluted, et cetera, et cetera. So I think you could do very well no matter where you are. It might take a couple of years off your life, if you're in a highly polluted area. But I think if you look at the abdominal circumference and diabetes, and you see that your chances of getting diabetes go up tenfold
if you have a bigger
so then your chances of developing cardiovascular disease and cancer, et cetera, et cetera. So it's very clear what's at the center of diseases and longevity. That doesn't mean that other things are not important. But also, if you look at our field, if you look at the animal research, after 100 years, I would say the consensus is that nutritional interventions are by far the most powerful in making a mouse live longer, right? Or making a rat live longer, or a monkey live longer. I would say that there are some drugs and interventions that are emerging now. But I would say if you took 100 scientists working on aging, I would say 90 will say, yeah, probably some type of nutrition-based intervention is going to be the one that I would pick to make any organism live longer.
Wow. And so this is really discovery from the last 20 years that you and a bunch of other people in your industry have been studying and researching, right? Where you found that this nutritional changes can really support the longevity.
The dietary restriction work has started like 100 years ago,
okay.
Right? And just what happens if you lower. But then, as I was saying, what happens is that you have lots of good and lots of bad, right? So now, I think what we and a few others have contributed to the nutrition and the restriction field is can we remove the bad and keep the good? Of course that's a big factor, right? So can you let's say that continuous calorie restriction is going to make you lose muscle mass. We've shown in the clinical trial, and we're about to confirm that. No muscle mass loss with FMDs, right? With fasting-mimicking diet.
So no muscle loss.
No muscle loss, and even in the patient
with 5 days. If it's longer, would it be some muscle loss or?
Yeah, of course. If it's longer, eventually you have no
food.
It's impossible to keep your muscle. But even in the women that did it for 8 cycles, once every month or two, if they did a little light training, muscle training exercise, they actually gain lean body mass, right? So that's one. Immune system. Well, that's another issue about calorie restriction, where is your immune system going to be weakened by having this continuous restriction, or by potentially also having continuous dietary intervention, say every day, 16 hours, every day, every other day, fasting. It's a very chronic intervention, right? So then there is a suspicion that you could negatively affect the immune system. Well, again, we're seeing, if anything, the opposite, right? So with periodic fasting-mimicking diets, we see, at least in mice, we show very clearly the blood stem cells are getting activated in bone marrow, and now you're rejuvenating the immune system, right? So, so I think that's much more sophisticated type of intervention and less burdensome, right? That's both are necessary. You have to be more sophisticated, but you have to use that sophistication to make sure that it's very easy on people, right? So, can you do 5 days of something that comes in a box twice a year? I would say 90% of people can do that.
Sure.
Are they gonna like it? Are they probably half of them are not gonna like it. The other half are probably gonna feel pretty good about it. I'm talking about not the sort of response we see. Some people say, I do it because I have to do it. Some people say, I love doing it because I feel better when I do it. But I think that's certainly a change compared to what we used to have. And I mean, there's other things. I think that the time-restricted eating, what Sachin Panda is doing, I think is great. And there are a few other things that the certain ketogenic diet, I think, for brief periods, that's interesting. What I think Eric Verdin and others are doing. I think there are some interesting aspects of that. Is there for example, lots of data now are suggesting if you go low carb, it's fine if it's a vegan diet, right? So if it's low carb animal based, it's not good at all. You're going to have a shorter life.
Really?
But this is meta-analysis, like the studies of all studies. But if it's low carb and it's plant-based, then it seems to be like the best diet. Say 40% carbohydrate, plant-based. That seems to be the best diet of all, right? So interesting thing that a few people are studying, and we're starting to study it too.
It seems like there are a lot of people that have lean, red meats that are healthy, that look great, that have clear skin, that seem to be aging well. Is red meat something that we should be looking out for in the future, or is a certain amount of it okay?
It depends what your goals are, let's say, right? So somebody could say, look, I eat red meat once a week. I have the organic kind, that is grass-fed, and is that gonna be really bad for me? Probably not, right? Probably not. But then most people will say, oh, I have the red meat, the steak once a week. Then I have the sausage once a week. Then for breakfast I have bacon. Yeah. Then you put it all together, and then you get into a Western diet. And the Western diet is what we use to let's say shorten the lifespan. We just published a paper in mice, and we had this like Western high-fat, high-calorie diet, and you see the mice just dying much earlier.
Really?
Right? Yeah, they get big and they die very early, right? With lots of problems, high cholesterol, heart problems. So then it's pretty clear that by having a Western diet full of animal proteins and animal fats, you're gonna have a problem. We're gonna have many problems, not just one. And our point has been, you got one life probably. It's relatively short, I would say, right? And so how do you optimize this life, right? And so to optimize it, I would say go with the longevity diet.
Yeah.
But then as many Americans will say, and many people in Europe, I can't do this. Can I have one steak a week? Okay, that's fine. It's probably not gonna. It might make no difference to you in your life. It might make some difference. Who knows? But certainly, and by the way, this is what most of the centenarians used to do. Have, let's say, red meat once a week. This was very common. So it wouldn't be that far from. I think the Okinawans probably not, but I would say that most Southern European centenarians had the red meat at least once a month, and maybe once a week.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So very little, not as much, not every day, not a few times a week, but the less you can do, it seems to be the better for longevity.
Yeah, and again, it's not really about red meat. It's about lots of animal products, the milk products, the white meats, the red meats, lots of them treated with antibiotics, lots of them having high levels of hormones, maybe steroid hormones, so it's probably the combination of all these animal-based products that each contributing a little bit to some inflammatory problems, to increasing the growth factors, to increasing glucose level in the blood. So you put it all together and you keep on going,
right?
And then you get the
problems,
multiple diseases that most people in Europe and America have.
What would you say? What do you think, based on your studies, almost 30 years that you've been in this field? What do you think we're going to discover in the next 30 years that we haven't discovered yet about, longevity, optimizing our health, Is there anything you think maybe this could happen, or we could discover this new thing, or we're early stages, but there's not enough data and research yet? Is there anything you see in either changing the gene or nutrition or something that could extend our lifespan even more?
Yeah, first of all, I think, I call the nutri-technology, right? So the nutrition field used to be sort of like a soft science, just a lot of ideas and observation. Now it's moving into a hard science. Exactly what kind of amino acids are in that composition and what is the frequency, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the nutri-technology is going to get better and better and better. And at some point, also, we're going to combine it with artificial intelligence. And so, it's going to revolutionize, I think, in the next 10, 15 years.
Really?
Yeah, so if somebody has a problem, let's say it could be an immune problem, it could be a gastrointestinal problem, it could be diabetes. And I think at some point, we'll be able to pinpoint exactly, let's say you have celiac disease, right? It's an autoimmunity. And it's caused by gluten. 30 years ago, nobody knew that, right? So you were eating pasta and bread and suffering like hell, and people had no idea. They just load you up with drugs, right? So now, no drugs, just avoid gluten. That's it. And then you're cured. So then imagine. So we know that it's very clear, or lactose and lactose intolerant, right? If you're Japanese, most Japanese are going to be lactose intolerant genetically. So if you drink milk and you're not feeling so well, you have a simple solution, right? And so imagine how many of those there are that we don't know about, and with omics, so be able to look at the microbiota composition, but also look at the there is something called metabolomics. It looks at all the molecules in the blood that change, and eventually, very soon, we'll be able to relate that to what you're eating, right? So then we'll be able to say, you need to avoid these 6 foods, and you need to have higher level of these another 10 foods, and that's going to solve the problem. So that's I think, a big, it's going to have a lot of potential. And then I think we'll see a lot of bionics. So
really
we'll see a lot of probably artificial organs and people have been working on this for a long time, and now there's a lot of excitement. Can you make a pancreas that is artificial, right? So of course they're working on that. And can you make kidneys that are artificial, and the heart, we already have it. So I think that in the next 30 years, we're going to see lots of this machine / human, combined. Of course, the longevity is a little bit trickier because you have to protect everything, right? Including the brain, and the brain is a tough organ to replace, right?
Sure.
So, and it's not going to happen anytime soon. But I think that the people that have heart problems or type 1 diabetes or kidney problems, and there's going to be a lot of these
solutions,
artificial systems that are going to be introduced.
That's crazy.
They're going to make a big difference.
Let's say you're born today. What do you think is the potential lifespan someone could have? And right now, what is the oldest age? 120 or something, or what's the
122? Yeah.
122. Is someone living today 122?
No.
That was the oldest.
Madame Calmont. She got to.
That's crazy. Who's the oldest person today?
I think right now we're probably around 117. I think somebody must be around that.
So if someone's born today with all it's coming, all we have right now, plus all that's coming in the next 20, 30 years, plus 70 years, what do you think is the potential? And your hypothesis is potential for lifespan?
I think that
if the brain is protected and everything's protected, obviously, but what is?
Yeah, certainly. I think that there's going to be 2 groups, right? So the world is going to be divided in 2, and there's going to be the ones that follow all the supported strategies, right? So this is why in the first book I talk about 5 pillars, right? So you talk about epidemiological studies, clinical studies, basic research, centenarian studies. Instead of saying, Longo thinks this, it's more like Longo puts together all these data and then says, okay, it's just hard to imagine how this particular diet could not work, right? It's worked for this and this and this and this and this. Yeah, so I think there's going to be a group that follows that does all the right things. And then there are a group that continues on. And the group that continues on the way they've been doing it now, I think is probably, we're going to see a lifespan about the same. But so it could be, I don't know, an average lifespan of 90 or 95, let's say. And but then the other group, I think, is gonna instead we're gonna start seeing maybe the 105 average lifespan, right? And of course, the drugs are gonna be there, and the drugs can make a difference with their their surgery, right? Can make a difference whether you die when you're 22,
right, or
you make it to 105, right, or 110. Yeah. So I think that all together, with the technology plus the nutrition plus. I wouldn't be surprised then if you have a population that follows all this that gets to 105 years of age average lifespan. Wow. So that means that half of them will live longer than that, and half of them will live a little bit shorter.
Sure, it's inspiring.
And, with some people maybe making it to the 125, 130 range. As you have a population, let's say a billion people followed all this for the next 120 years, it'd be surprising that one of them would not, let's say, get to 130.
That'd be amazing. 130 years, that's crazy, right?
Yeah,
it's inspiring.
It would be a long life. But
you mentioned the 5 pillars. What are the 5 pillars for increasing longevity you just mentioned?
Yeah, so the 5 pillars, epidemiological studies were the studies of the numbers, right? The population, 100,000 people that eat lots of cheese, and people that don't. Then the clinical studies, so once you identify, let's say, proteins are too much protein is bad for you, you do a randomized trial where you see people that have high protein diet, people that have low protein diet, and look at the changes, maybe not for 20 years, maybe for 1 year, but you can already monitor that. Then the basic research, okay, so you think a high protein diet is bad for you, why don't you give a high protein diet to mice? Do they live shorter? They do, right? So and do they have more diseases? They do.
Oh man.
So that's a third pillar. And then centenarians, if you think a high protein diet is so bad for all of us, let's go around the centenarians. Do any of them have a high protein diet? Nobody does. Right, not the Okinawas, not Loma Linda, not the Sardinians, not so nobody does. They might have a low protein, most of them low protein, some of them might have a moderate protein diet, but you don't see a high protein famous population, population famous for making it to 100 years of age. So that's a good sign, right? It's another pillar. And then complex systems, I think it's always good to have a reductionist approach and think of the human being as a plane or a car, something that is complicated, sophisticated and complicated. How do you? I always use it, for example, when people ask, shall I go running, 20 miles a day, or shall I never run? Well, I always say, well, if you keep your car in the garage all the time, not good, right? If you drive your car all the time, not good either. Nobody wants a 10-year-old car that's got 180,000 miles, right?
Right.
Nobody wants to buy that. Why is that? It's like, well, it's a car that's being used a lot. It's good, right? No. Why? Well, because the mechanic will say it's just going to break apart. It's just a matter of time. Now, the body has self-repair mechanisms which the car doesn't have, but still, if it's overused, it's gonna break down.
Right. This is inspiring. Is there anything else we should know about longevity, or is this this feels pretty inspiring?
I think you covered it.
This is inspiring to me. You've got an amazing book, The Longevity Diet, that people can get right now. It's inspiring. It's got a lot of this information, plus more details and examples on how to really implement this in your life. The fasting-mimicking diet, which I did years ago, I want to redo again, which is the 5-day process of calorie restriction, plant-based specific types of foods and soups, I think it was, and some vitamins in there. I'm not sure if it's changed from 5 years ago or if it's pretty much the same, but
pretty close to the same,
yeah.
because of clinical trials, right?
Right, yeah. So you've got that. People can check out valterlongo.com and they can learn more about that. The book is there. The fasting mimicking program is there as well, correct?
Well, the book talks about the fasting mimicking program, and the foundations, right? Of course, the foundation here in Los Angeles, Create Cures, it's a nonprofit, a clinic, and we try to take care of people. Those that cannot afford it, they're not charged, and those that can afford it, they pay a pretty low price.
Donation based or something. Yeah. So what is Create Cures? Is a clinic here in LA?
It's the foundation. It's the foundation that I started years ago with the idea of like bringing creativity into medicine, and so it's here in Santa Monica, and the idea is to do what we discussed earlier. To have the team, the nutritionist, the physician, et cetera. Still, the Italian one is more advanced. The American one is in its early days, but I think it's getting there. Yeah.
Who is a good candidate for this foundation to be a part of it?
You mean to be a patient, or
to be a patient?
Anybody. I mean, so there's people that are overweight. There's people that are athletes, but there are people with cancer. There are people with autoimmunities, and so we try to work with doctors at the big hospitals in town or small hospitals to try to help them out.
What's the process look like if someone like me wanted to go there and check it out? What would the process be like?
Well, just call the clinic or email them and createcures.org, and then set up an appointment, and they can get you set up with blood tests. And then, or you can have your own blood test, and then.
And they analyze and they kind of put you on a game plan or a process.
Yeah. Then they implement the different approaches. Of course, very different from somebody who's healthy, who might just get the longevity diet, and then measures of, let's say, muscle function and muscle mass, and versus somebody's cancer, in which case now we need to talk to the oncologist that is treating them. And decide, can they do certain things? Can they not? Is the oncologist favorable or not?
Gotcha. So your team assesses that and puts people on a plan, and then supports them in that process. Yeah. You're saying it's free for people that can't afford it, and then others you pay a certain amount.
Yeah, the others is pretty reasonable.
So
charge. And I think there is probably a discount plan for everybody, meaning like even people that don't make that much money.
Right.
Get a pretty heavy discount, So
that's cool. Createcures.org.
Yes.
So anyone can go to the website, check it out, and see if there's the right fit for them.
Yes.
That's cool. Okay, we got that. We got your book, The Longevity Diet. How else can we be of support to you? I checked out your Instagram. You're not that consistent on there, but you got some great stuff on there. Some of it's in Italian. So, but if you want the English version, where should they go? To the main website?
Yeah, Facebook. We still have a page that is pretty active, and I have people that post on it. I think soon enough we'll have to maybe invest a little bit more time in the various social
platforms. Yeah. But great stuff with the book and the website and everything here. So how else can we support you and your mission?
I think that's it. We send people to the Create Cures, and also donation. Of course, it's a foundation that takes donation. And if anybody, we're trying now to do an event next year. Probably going to be a race in Los Angeles. To raise funds. So for the foundation, and so that we can follow more people. And
that's cool.
And now we used to have doctors, and now we realize that we need to wait until we have a California medical license. But that's a very expensive operation when physicians are also part of it. So that's why it's important for us to raise funds.
That's cool. So a race, like a 5K or.
We'll see. We're thinking of the details, but it's probably going to be in May, and yes, so we're going to have people that get other people involved.
Nice.
And each.
I'm in. If I'm in town, I'll be in the race. Okay. So I'm excited.
Thanks.
Amazing. This is inspiring stuff. I've got a couple final questions for you. This is called the 3 truths question. I ask everyone this question at the end of an interview. So I'd like you to imagine a hypothetical scenario that it is your last day on Earth, many years away. You live to however old you want to live. You've followed your own plan, so you live over 100 and you live a great life. But for whatever reason, it's the last day. And you've got to take all of your content, your books, this interview, anything you've ever said, you've got to take it with you to the next place, or it leaves the world. So
Only said?
Written, said, any content. All content you've ever created, it's gone. So we don't have access to your information anymore. Mm-hmm. But you have a piece of paper and a pen, and you get to write down 3 lessons that you've learned in your life. And this is all we would have to remember the wisdom that you gained and you'd share with us. I call this the 3 truths. What would you say would be those 3 lessons or 3 truths for you?
Well, for sure, take care of your health, and that includes your mental health. I would say for sure, keep what you need and donate the rest. I would say that's probably a very important thing. And then I think that the third would be, I don't know, maybe spend as much time as possible with the people that you care about.
I love it. Those are good truths. It's good wisdom.
Mine, yeah. But
well, I want to acknowledge you before I ask the final question for your commitment and dedication to serving so many people who have struggled with their health and are confused. I think there's a lot of confusion in the world, and your commitment to science, research, clinical studies, all the different things that you've done in the last 30 years in the education system to bringing this wisdom to the world has been extremely helpful for so many people who have no clue what they're doing. So I really acknowledge you for showing up consistently, for walking the talk, for continuing the research and putting this out there in a powerful way. It's really inspiring, and you're helping people live longer and healthier lives. So I appreciate that.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, it's really inspiring. My last question is, what's your definition of greatness?
Probably, I mentioned this in my first book, change things in positive for as many people as possible.
Yeah.
Right. If you can make it better for 1 billion people, you just, change 1 billion lives for the better. So I think that's probably greatness.
What have we been consuming the longest? This supplement is new. This drug is new. Humans, we have millions of years of evolution in relationship with eating foods that have supported our development. What do my genes expect me to eat? Where does it expected to come from?
From a concentrated pill supplement or from food?